Hey, what's up everybody? Welcome to this week's Q&A. Got a bunch of cool questions, so let me just jump right in and get to it. Okay, first up, Pork Chop Express asked if I had a recommended manual or book or some sort of course to learn how to work on PVM or BVM monitors. So I don't know of any. I'm not saying they don't exist. The only thing I do know of is service manuals. And I believe there's some people that have put videos out, but once again, I'm always uncomfortable recommending something because I don't know how they deal with the safety factor. But overall, if you want to learn how to work on these things, I would probably start with like a cheap 13-inch consumer grade CRT, or if you could find a smaller 14-inch PVM or something. Make sure to discharge all of these properly. I've seen people say, "Oh no, BVMs discharge fine," and just grab the anode cup, and it's like, it's not a risk I would want to take. So just be very safety conscious. And other than that, a lot of the repair is really the same as you would find with most electronics, in that, look for capacitors, look for traces that have been ruined because of leaky capacitors or other things. The only other advice I can give you is if you have a Sony BVM that's close but not perfect as far as like calibration, don't do a factory reset, because you might ruin a perfectly good calibration on a system that only needs capacitors. So the only other thing too is if you wanted to get into like modding you and your friends' Super Nintendos or Genesis consoles or something as a small hobby, I would totally say go for it. It could be fun if you enjoy doing that stuff. It's safe to work on. A lot of the mistakes you could make are reversible by experts, so it's cool to do that. However, it's a lot more work to do PVMs and BVMs. Even people that really, really know what they're doing and are good at it would take a full weekend to do a recap and to do a calibration, and even then there's things that only experts might know. So I'm certainly not trying to tell you not to learn how to do this, just have realistic expectations that it's a very large learning curve versus just modding consoles. So yeah, if I find anything, I'll definitely put stuff up. I eventually want to do videos myself, but I just want to make sure I dedicate the amount of time that they deserve. I don't want to do an hour video shoot, just flicking on a camera and going, talking about how to do this without really getting in depth and really verifying everything that I talk about with experts to make sure that I'm not accidentally passing off any bad habits or anything. So I would just I would just start small and go from there. I think one of the things that a few people have done is gotten a small 13-inch Sony, practiced discharging, and then practiced doing like RGB mods, recaps on it, put it back together, and there's always a few mistakes, but for a $10 curbside item that might even be free, it's not the end of the world compared to like if you found yourself a really nice PVM and made it did some irreparable damage or anything. But hopefully I'll have stuff like this soon, but I would imagine the earliest is 6 months away, because I got to get through my other backlog and make sure to continue to do the weekly stuff and the website. So it's a little over my head at the moment, but I'm going for it. Firebrand X posted in regards to last week's SSDS3 audio questions, and he said that yes, you need to route the CD audio through the SSDS3, otherwise you won't get that. You'd only get the ROM audio. So you would have to use two cables if you did an internal RGB mod and still wanted to use the SSDS3 for ROMs and CD. So you would need audio from that and video from the console, which, depending on your setup, might be perfectly fine. So it really just depends on what you need. And something else he said is there's still CD audio channels are swapped. They were supposed to do a firmware fix on this, but never did. I guess Firebrand X said that Terra Onion sent him a private firmware just to confirm that it fixed it, but never released it to the public. It's weird. So yeah, just keep in mind and be aware. I supposedly have parts en route to me. Firebrand X's box arrived. I just haven't even opened it yet. Sorry, dude. So we're looking like maybe 2 weeks before I could do a video on this. An objective video. I'm going to make sure to put my normal disclaimers in, but an honest and objective video about TurboGrafx or PC Engine solutions. So hopefully we'll see how these things perform. Kev79 chimed in about the Terra Onion drama from last week, and no, I'm not going to go off about that again, but one point that he made was that he was wondering if some of these things were a language barrier. And that's something that's very important to me because when I spent a lot of time out in Taiwan, I'm loud and I like to be silly and have fun. And all of my friends and their friends out there were always extremely patient with me. So if I said something being silly, they always took the time to be like, how did he mean that? Okay, all right. So it's something that affected me really positively, and I always try to bend over backwards to make sure that any issues are not a language barrier. I talk with a lot of people on at least a weekly, but sometimes daily basis, where English isn't their first language or their second, but their third language. And there's been a few times where we've had back and forths where something will be posted, and I'll be like, "Wait a minute, did you mean this?" And the person will say, "Yeah, isn't that what I said?" No, no, it's not. It sounded really mean. Here's why. And I always try to be as patient as humanly possible and try to make sure that language barrier is never ever an issue. I mean, I'm only human. I make mistakes. I try to correct those mistakes when I make them. But it's something that's extremely important to me because of all the people around the world that have donated their time and effort and help to try to make all of these things that we as retro gamers use. And a lot of them don't barely speak English, and they still try their best to communicate with everybody in the English-speaking parts of the world and try to make these things for everybody. So I definitely appreciated your perspective on all that, and I just wanted to take the minute to drive home the point that making sure to break that language barrier is something that's always really important to me. I wish I had the time and brain power to learn a bunch of languages, but that's just not on the cards. So no, none of that Terra Onion stuff was from a language barrier. I actually have a few friends that their first language is Spanish, double checking some stuff for me always just to make sure. But no, that was a 100% true, proven by facts. I could prove everything that I said. And I genuinely don't think that was a language barrier issue at all in the slightest bit. But once again, thanks for your perspective, and thanks so much to everybody who's been patient with me, knowing that I only speak English, but still wanting to help out with things in projects, pages, videos, whatever that I've been working on. Big, huge, and genuine thank you to all of you who have been patient with me, and I try to pay it back always by extending the same amount of patience to others. Ludo posted a follow-up to his question from last week about his Dreamcast RGB SCART cable. He had one that worked on a PAL Dreamcast, but not an NTSC Japanese version. So I'm glad you reminded me about this because I did check with HD Retrovision and they said no, it should not be any different whatsoever. But it seems like you've solved the problem and I had forgotten all about this. Apparently the problem was that he needed to push the jack in really hard on the Dreamcast console side, and I have seen that before. I think it's the tolerance for the ports versus the cable ends as well. There's probably more of a tolerance on the cable end side of things, but the first time I got a Toro, I plugged it in and it wouldn't work, and I'm going, what the heck? And then I'm looking at it, and I just so happened to notice that you could still see a little bit of the metal shielding on the outside of the cable, and I pushed it flush, and I felt a little awkward because I thought I was pushing too hard, and once it went in, everything started working. So that's something I've run into a lot. I'm sorry, I totally forgot to even mention that last week. So anybody who has Dreamcast stuff, make sure that the cable is flush to the plastic. And I'm glad to get the problem fixed, and yeah, sorry for forgetting about that. I should have remembered, especially because of how many times it happened to me in the past. Moon Turtle had a good question that I probably should have been clearer about. The question was, when is usually the latest you'll check for new questions on a Q&A post? Do you ever have to limit the number of questions you answer? The question I posted yesterday was a bit late and it got missed, but I figure it might have also just been a dumb question. There's really no such thing as a dumb question unless you're asking, like, what's your website again? But, so I normally try to do these Q&As on Friday morning Eastern Time. Sometimes I have to do them on Thursdays, and when I do, it's usually Thursday afternoon. But, sometimes things happen, and I have to pre-scheduled events I gotta be at, whatever else. So I think if you want to be safe and you have a question that's really important to you, you could email me directly, and I'll try my best to respond. But Thursday morning, if you want something included in a Q&A, by Thursday morning, pretty much guaranteed it's going to be in. But like right now, it's 11 a.m. on Friday the 30th, and I'm just making sure all the questions come through. So I'll go back to last week. Your question was, can you get a recommendation for a SCART to VGA adapter that would make it possible to play light gun games on a stock SNES with a VGA CRT monitor? Is that possible? So the best SCART to VGA adapter on the planet is the OSSC. You just need an HDMI to VGA adapter on the output side, but it's not going to work without a modification. You might want to just try, especially if you're looking to play like any of the LCD gun mod games like Duck Hunt. You might want to try that and see if it works. It's possible that other NES games will, just because of the. I'm not going to fully nerd out on you here, but because of the way the zapper works, if it's really only NES games you're looking for, fine. But if you specifically said stock SNES with a VGA CRT monitor, and I don't think that's going to be possible. Sorry about that. Dave Sobel was asking about ColecoVision and Intellivision RGB mods. So the mods that were made for those two consoles, I believe, were both made by one person who sometimes sells them and sometimes doesn't. Yerky was, for a while, the exclusive installer. I don't think he is anymore. I know that Dan, Citrus 3000 PSI, was working on a ColecoVision RGB mod. That was his own. It was not based on the other one. I know if somebody in Canada was working on one. And I believe Ash Evans was finishing up an Intellivision RGB mod. So definitely hit up Dan, Citrus 3000 PSI, dansprojects.com, I believe it is. I think it's easier to go to Twitter and look up Citrus 3000 PSI. And I've seen personally the Coleco and Intellivision RGB mods, and they're great. If those are some of your favorite consoles, they're definitely worth doing. But you asked about other options, and one thing that you mentioned was the RetroTink. So a very cool thing that you could do in the interim, if you're going to just wait until you get the RGB mods, or maybe one's available sooner than another, you could take the RF output, go through any cheap VCR, and then make sure it's an older VCR, not one of the newer DVD VCR combos. I'll get back to that in a minute. And then run the composite output through the RetroTink 2X. And then you'd be able to play that on a flat screen. It's not going to look great, but it's going to be playable. And try using the filters that the RetroTink uses, and it should be at least good enough to get you going. The RetroTink doesn't add any lag, and older VCRs won't either. However, the things that were the DVD and VCR combo machines sometimes have video processors in them, and because those weren't designed for gaming at all, you could have like 10, 12 milliseconds of lag on it. It's pretty bad. Once again, they're not supposed to be gaming machines, so I'm certainly not looking down upon that. It's just make sure to get a basic old VCR, even if doesn't play tapes anymore, RF in, composite out, and you should be good. Alternatively, you could do the easier composite video mods to both of those. And then same thing, just composite directly into the RetroTink to hold you off until the RGB ones are now newly available. And I need to update those pages. Hopefully, if there's an easy place to buy these where they're going to be regularly in stock, I could just put that up and have links to those. But yeah, I think hopefully that'll get you started. At the very least, RF adapter, older VCR into the RetroTink, into a flat screen, and you should be good. And even if you get the RGB mods in the future, I still believe that the RetroTink is a great tool to have. There's a million different uses for it, so it's certainly not a throwaway when you're done with it. There's a bunch of other things you could use it for. It's a Serial Wow had two questions. First, he picked up an Extron 201 RXI to fix the image shift we've been talking about, but it only has a D-sub input. So it's not a VGA input because it doesn't just require a VGA signal, but it is the VGA style D-sub input. So the easiest way to do this is to get just a Sync Slayer, which is the SCART to VGA adapter, or a Sync Strike from Arcade Forge, either one, whichever is easier for you to pick up. I've used them both, and that should work. I believe the Sync Slayer can output H-Sync and V-Sync using one of the settings. So I think that would guarantee compatibility, because while it might seem a little weird, I've had so many of these in the past, and I've had different experiences with each. So, 4 201 RXIs might work a little bit different, and I don't know if it's because of the jumper settings. I don't know if there was a firmware. Maybe I just made some mistakes. I mean, I've had so many electronic devices pass through. I try to be thorough, and I usually have a good memory, but whatever. So I would try something like that, just to get either an RGBS or an RGB HV TTL level sync going through there, and see if that works. It should. You could definitely do this with the older G-SCARTs. You might be able to with a newer G-SCART and a custom SCART to VGA cable, but overall it might just be cheaper and easier to get one of those devices. So hopefully those will point you in the right direction. Second, do you have a mailing address you're willing to share where you could send items for the Patreon or Discord giveaway? Sure, I'll happily give that out. I don't know how to say this without sounding like an ass, so I guess I'll just say it, and hopefully you'll all understand what I mean. You can't even really see it behind me, but I have a pile of stuff to get through. I have a few giveaways that are already queued up. I have a few stores that wanted to give me stuff to review, and I don't like to do that. There's only special circumstances. So I said, well, I'll do the review, use it for a while, and use it as a giveaway. So I guess that's a really long way of saying, sure, I'll happily share my address, but if you send stuff, I might not get to it. It might end up in a pile before I even open it. So I just don't want anybody to think I'm being disrespectful. I genuinely am not. Somebody just sent me something the other day, and it's absolutely awesome. I'll be wearing it on camera at some point soon. I'd make sure to do I think I already sent the thank you email, but I don't know. I guess that was a long, rambly way of saying everything's appreciated, and just please try your best not to be offended if I don't use it, or it doesn't end up being a giveaway for a while or something. It's just everything's always super appreciated, and I just don't want people to be offended or feel disrespected if I don't use it the way they wanted. Sorry for the ramble. Some things I don't mind if people misunderstand me, because I'm like, whatever, I feel like I'm right, so I'm okay. But some things are really important that people get what I mean by it. Really important to me, at least. So thank you for asking. I'll post the address in this one, in the Patreon page of this episode, and we'll see how that goes. But thanks again, and let me know how that works out with your image shift issue. HiJuice posted a bunch of very good links to PS2 soft modding and hard drive loader. The one link that stood out that I hadn't been paying attention to the scene was that there is now something called Open PS2 Loader, which replaced HD Loader, and it's still getting regularly updated. So that's awesome. I got to switch mine over to that then and see. And also, HiJuice said no need to have access to a hacked PS2 in order to do that. But I read through those links. I skimmed through them. I didn't read through them, and I couldn't understand how you do that without already having a memory card that has some kind of soft mod on it. So I think you might be able to do that with getting one of those memory card USB readers, which are pretty expensive. The last one I saw, I think it was like $50 or something. So maybe I missed something. Please, please chime in. I didn't have time to go through and read those long forum posts, but if there is a way to do that that's cheap and easy, I would love to put that information up on the website. But the only ways that I've known in the past is simply by using another either hard modded or soft modded PS2, or by getting one of those USB memory card readers and doing it that way. So thanks for the links. I'll put the Open PS2 Loader link directly in this description, because I thought that was worth people seeing. And maybe if you would just do me a favor and clarify the whole not needing a hacked PS2 to do it, because if I'm missing something, that's a huge piece of info missing from my site, and I would really love to include that for people. So thank you, I appreciate it. My Retrofix had 2 questions. First, any update on scoping tutorials about CD laser calibrations? That's something I really want to jump into soon. I was going to start with the Sega CD2 because somebody had sent me one in that I was going to do a video on, and Voltar suggested that that's not one that I should start on. He said that that's actually a tricky one and something that should really be left to the experts. So I believe Voltar wouldn't steer me wrong for something like that. So I probably will start with like a PlayStation 1 or something. I do want to do one of those. I just there's so many videos I really badly want to do, but I got to make sure to keep up what I've been doing and do those. So I promise I'll get to it as soon as I can. And I also promise that whichever ones I do, the information is going to be verified by all of the nerds of the Retro Roundtable. Nick, Steve, Renee, and Zach will make sure that the video that goes up is worthy of going up, not just me poking around with the scope, figuring stuff out. Like it'll actually be it might not be the best tutorial, but it'll be the most technically accurate one. I could promise you that. Second was a great question. Where did you pick up the cart that you used to haul around that 32-inch BVM? Do not make the same mistake I did. This scared me to death. So I'll go through really quickly. I got a page that's just kind of a fun page on the site that shows the different gaming stations that I've built over the years. And I used to use, I think this is it. I used to use the Trinity Eco Storage 3-tier thing because it's very cheap. As you can see, it was $68 free shipping. That's the one I have. Well, you can't even really see it, but that's the one I have right now with my 14-inch monitor on it. It's incredibly handy for lighter monitors. I would not use anything more than a 20-inch on this one because if you could see in the picture here, those wheels, the casters, screw into the bottom. So what had happened was I had my D32 and my Mitsubishi Megaview on those. I sold the Megaview, so now it's the D32. It's right over there in my new apartment. And every time I would wheel it, those casters, because they'd be, sitting back, the casters turn every time you have to push it back and forward. And it was so heavy that as it was turning, it was backing the screws out. So I knew I needed another one. I knew it was a little flimsy. So I talked to John, the owner of Tasty Chicken, an awesome retro gamer, somebody that supports everything that we do in the scene. And he showed me the Global Industries one where you order your own racks. So you need minimum 2. I like 3, both for stability and storage. It comes in all these different colors. I probably would have gotten a blue one if I had known because, I like blue. And whatchamacallit, sorry, flipping the wrong links. And then you need, you just need the good casters, which are expensive. And then you need the poles, the posts that go in. So the reason this is so important, 2 reasons, is that the newer one is deeper. So the D32 will fit on it completely flat, front to back. That wasn't such a big deal with the Trinity one. It stuck out like 1.5 feet behind, but it's so top or front heavy where the glass was that I could put all of my weight on the back and it wouldn't tip. That's not so much it. It's just that if you're going to take up all this space anyway, now when you back it up against the wall, it's the cart that hits the wall, not the back of your BVM. You also get that much more storage for consoles or whatever else. So that's a very big bonus, but the caster, that is the huge, huge difference. Because when John got me these, showed me these, I hammered in the casters. They cannot back themselves out. They're hammered in. I put this thing together. It feels a lot sturdier and stronger. And I wheeled it up to the other one, and I was gonna have my buddy Beast come over and move it with me, just because it's easier. And I'm looking, and my D32 is teetering back and forth. I'm going, geez, the poles don't look bent. I wonder why this is. And I looked down, and one of the wheels had almost completely backed itself off in the front of the Trinity 3-tier one. I was probably 3 or 4 movings away from the wheel falling off and my D32 come crashing down. So I just kind of sucked it up, bad back and all, grabbed it and placed it onto the new cart, which is now very solid and sturdy. So that scared me to death. I almost lost my D32 to a crappy caster. So I screwed it back in, I tightened it up. Now that's the one sitting back there, the old cheap one, and it's, for the weight that's on there now, it's absolutely perfect. I would be comfortable using a 20-inch monitor on that one, but stick with the good stuff. And the other bonus, too, is that on the high-quality ones with the good casters, there's like a not strong person at all could very easily wheel this across the room, whereas the other one, the casters couldn't support the weight as well, so even me, I had to give it like a good hard push every time. Another great tip which I accidentally skimmed through the page before. You could find these cheaper, that 124 and free shipping. I think I got mine for like 90. But this right here, this exact link that is on that page, seems to be the perfect height for 20-inch and 14-inch monitors. It's sturdy. You got to make sure to get that exact model, the W26E, because otherwise you can get it way too high. I don't know if you could see it in this. Let me, but that's the same cart that this little, no, you can't see it, I'm sorry. That's the same cart that this little gaming station's on. It's really, if I had the space for it, I would have bought at least one more of these whenever they go on sale and just leave it in storage, because they're so super handy and sturdy. So that's by far my favorite choice for 20 inches. You could place the 20-inch long way. You could do 14-inch wide and have 2 speakers on each side and have plenty of room. You could have the arcade station like I have there. So sorry for going off on such a long rant on this one, but I cannot even tell you the difference it made getting the better equipment. You know, using this one, the metal cart for the 20 inches, and then piecing together the wire shelves and the correct components to make sure that my larger monitors are safe. And I think this combination here would be good enough for any large monitor, 32, 36, whatever. It's certainly rated at 1,200 pounds, so you know, having a 300-pound monitor on it should be fine. And please just, if you have something like a D32, do not make the mistake that I made and almost lose your awesome, awesome find because of a cheap cart. So sorry for the long rant, but I just wanted to make sure to save everybody from the mistakes I made. And if you're looking for both the links to all of this stuff as well as just a fun little page showing some of the old carts that I used to make, I'll leave a link in the Patreon page to get to that. Eat It Up 86 asked if I've seen those French NESs on eBay. Yeah, got one here too. Check this out. My buddy Chris from Belgium got me one, and that is a fully molded port that comes from the factory like that, which is exactly why I wanted this. There is nothing on the other side. There's no outputs. It's RGB only, and it comes with a cable that is a proprietary. It kind of looks like the multi-out, but it is not. There are 10 pins, not 12. So this does not fit the SNES connector. This does not fit the Famicom disk system connector. This seems to be completely unique. So I'm really looking forward to messing with this. But to answer your questions on it, it is not region free and it is not real RGB. There is an article on the site, which I'll try to find and link to, that talks about the different French consoles and why they had to be RGB. But basically, it's a composite to RGB converter. So they're PAL only, they're not 60 hertz, and it's really just composite video. The reason I wanted this is because I want to do one of two things depending on who I can get to help me. I originally planned on putting a PlayChoice 10 modded NTSC board in here with a full recap and the good board that you can get the least amount of jail bars, so that I could have technically an official Nintendo RGB system, because it uses Nintendo's PlayChoice 10 RGB chip from the arcades. It would use their official cable and case, and I thought that would be neat. That's something that probably nobody else in the world would give a shit about but me, but I think it would be very cool. But that's going to take a lot of work because I want a special board designed to make sure it's as good as it can be. Worst comes to worst, I could take this, do a full recap in a region mod, and put a NES RGB kit in it and just wire it up to that multi-out. But either way, I'm really, thank you very much to Chris for getting this for me. I think it's really neat, but it's neat as a project, not neat to just use as it is. So hopefully that explained it pretty good, but I cannot wait to do a full video on this to show everybody. I might even try to retro bright the top so I can get it all good looking, but yeah, I'm really looking forward to doing a French NES video and how to make a official Nintendo RGB NES console. Cameron McCown was asking about controller adapters for the Mister project and was wondering if the BlissBox 4-play adapter would work. Yep, I have one. It works fine. I believe there's some lag with it, but I believe they're working on lowering it with the latest firmware. I'm not sure if the Mister is in a place where you would really use it as a hardcore gaming console yet, so I would use it and really still consider it in test form, but they're aiming to make as low lag as possible, and there's still the controller adapter project for the Mister, which should be, almost immeasurable amounts of lag. But yeah, right now, if you want to use original controllers with the Mister, give it a try, and especially if you're using it on an RGB monitor, I really doubt you'd be able to see any difference unless you're a speedrunner or like one of the top tier fighting game people. But I mean, if you have any feedback, definitely post, because I'd like to hear if you found any issues. In my basic testing, it just worked fine. Ryan Rubel had 2 questions. First, what are the recommended color palettes for the NES RGB? So while yes, this is completely subjective, my personal favorites, and remember, I'm mildly colorblind, so you're definitely going to see this different than me, but in no particular order, Firebrand X's color palette, the Sony palette, and Naked Arthur's. I believe the last time I had a NES RGB system, I just would always leave it on the Firebrand X palette, but there were a few games where I liked that it leaned a little towards the blue side on the Sony palettes, and there were a few that Naked Arthur's just, it was fun to switch between them. I don't think that I found a clear winner, but it was just cool to see a slightly different perspective on it. So I know he Firebrand X has all of those up on his page, and I believe you could select one of many different combinations. So I believe that combination's available as one, and if you don't have an opinion on it yet, I would just start with those and see, and if there's something about it you don't like, then switch to the others. The only thing that's kind of cool, so if you have a programmer, so you could reprogram the board yourself, I would definitely load up one of the ones with the PlayChoice 10 palette. Like, for example, if you had a programmer, you don't mind doing this, load up the one that has the PlayChoice 10 palette and the original FCE palette. Play on that for a little bit, both so you could get a feel of what it looked like on the arcade machines, just for fun, and so you can get a look at what NES color palettes were for so many years, and then load up the 3 that I mentioned so that you could see why I prefer them so much better. I think you'd probably agree that those 3 are absolutely better. And then kind of go back and see which ones are your favorite. It really is just preference. But if you don't have a programmer, you're sending it out to a professional, those are the 3 I would recommend. And at the very least, you're not going to hate them. They might not end up being your favorites, but I promise you won't hate those. Second question, he was going to go with an N64 advanced board for his N64, but saw Bordy posted on a version 2. So I think the newer version of the board outputs 480p, VGA, as well as component video and RGB, whereas the original one is just RGB, but can still have all of his deblur features. So if you were looking for a fully functional version that did everything, I would go with the N64 Advanced. I mean, at that point, that's more like an analog version of the Ultra HDMI. Of course, I mean that in a good way, but depending on your needs, you might even get an Ultra HDMI and a VGA converter if that was really going to be your focus. But if you really just wanted an excellent RGB-based one that could be used on all N64s, have all the deblur stuff in the 15-bit color mode, just get Bordy's regular board or Tim Worthington's. I think they're very similar in performance because you could use Bordy's firmware on both. And it really would come down to what's the easiest thing to purchase. I believe Ben from iFix Retro did one of the newer version 2 installs, so you might want to check him out on Twitter and just hit him up and say, just ask if that's something that you want to have done for you. But other than that, I mean, it's the options now are so amazing, you almost can't go wrong unless you specifically needed one feature like VGA, HDMI, etc. So hope those were clear answers for you. Also, you talked afterwards about getting a Mayflash component to VGA adapter and then asking if the Carby's HDMI versus using the Mayflash versus official cables and what are the trade-offs. I haven't really had any good luck with the Mayflash stuff. Maybe I'm wrong, maybe I've only used Sorry for the hard cut in your answer. As soon as I started the second part, there was a bunch of sirens and screaming. I didn't want to annoy people leaving that in. But I believe the next part of your question, if I'm understanding correctly, is that you have all of your HDMI stuff, including the output of your GameCube, running through an HDMI switch that goes to a VGA switch, which then also has your VGA adapter at the end. And you're wondering if that's going to be better than something else running through your XM29. To be honest, I would base this on what you already own. So if you already have a Carby with HDMI output, using one of the good VGA or HDMI to VGA adapters might just be the best solution because it stays digital for the longest time. If you already owned the official component cables, I would say use that into a key digital converter into your VGA switch. You mentioned a Mayflash converter, but I've had mixed experience with those in the past. If it's working good for you, cool, but I think they do a lot of rebranding. But I mean, at this point, you're talking about a setup that's going to really apply specifically to how it ends up in your chain. So I would just keep trying until you find a solution that you're happiest with. But I could be a little bit more of a help if you're going direct into the monitor, but HDMI to an HDMI switch, to a VGA switch, to a converter, through, there's a lot of stuff in that chain that could affect the signal. So I just would use whatever you feel you've been happy enough with. Also, you said, asked if I'm following the new Atari VCS project. No, respectfully, I'm not even going to read anything about it until there's actual hardware to play and things to be seen. I just lost all faith in a lot of those hype companies. Show me a piece of hardware that works. Other than that, I don't really care anymore. So, sorry. Bad Reality asked if there's a danger of using a Y cable for the audio input of a RGB monitor. So I'm assuming this is a scenario where you have a console that has stereo audio, 2 RCA jacks. You use a Y cable and connect it into the mono audio input of a PVM. Will it blow it out? I've had people post before when I talked about this, respectful and technical responses explaining how it's dangerous and you shouldn't do it and how they've had problems in the past. I really think it just comes down to risk versus reward. I do it on both of my smaller monitors. So the little crappy test monitor I have here, the reason I have that one is because I don't care if something blows out. I use it for testing. I'm sure if I took the time to restore it, it would be amazing, but it's not what I bought it for. And the 14-inch PVM back there, I love that one, but all the time I will plug in stereo to mono to test something for a few moments. So if you did that with like a super gun with unattenuated audio, yeah, you could blow that out. But for me personally, the risk to reward, I would rather just use that speaker for a few minutes here and there, or the speaker built into this one I don't really care about if it dies, and then I'll just either deal with fixing it if it blows or not. I think that if the audio channel were to blow out, it wouldn't affect anything else on the monitors. So my opinion for my use on those two is that I would just do it because I don't game with it. There's not hours going on with audio coming out of it. Whereas like my D32, it doesn't have an audio input, but there's no way in hell I would do it. Even though I would lean to the fact that it's probably perfectly safe, it's not worth it to me. I do not want to hurt that thing. You can't get them anymore. So that's really, without doing a more technical analysis of this, without verifying people's findings, going through, which I don't have the time or, no offense, desire to really do for something like this, I would just give the advice of, if you don't care if your audio channel in your PVM blows out, or if you're only using it here and there to test consoles or something, I wouldn't worry about it. But if this is something that you want to keep and preserve and make sure that it's a great monitor, you want it to last forever, anytime there's a chance of overloading something, even just a chance, I wouldn't do it just because. So, and it's a weird thing for me to say, like, I don't care about these other two because I'm always talking about making these things last forever and preservation, but these are not just museum items, these are tools, and I use this as a tool. So the thought of hurting this is the same as for me as like, oh, what if I scratch up my power drill and my saw and my hammer? Well, I mean, I want my stuff to last forever and I'm going to take care of it, but if I scratch my hammer because I'm hammering something, what it's there for. And I think these utility 9-inch monitors that I've used for testing, I really, I use those as a tool. And I wouldn't feel as bad if something happened because it's exactly the intention of my use is to test stuff, and I would so much rather would have that blow out than anything else. So hope that was a decent perspective on it. But I guess the short version is if you want to be safe, just don't do it. All right, that's it for this week. For anybody new to these Q&As, please remember to post your questions on the Patreon page, not in the YouTube page. This is really focused on Patreons, so I turn off the comments on YouTube, and I make these available for everybody about a month later, just because no reason to keep this stuff a secret or anything. But this is definitely centered around all of my amazing Patreon subscribers. So any questions at all, post in wherever you're finding this video, post there on the Patreon page. And I normally can't go back and look at the other ones. There's just too many to go through at this point. So any questions that they may have missed from last week, maybe you posted it the day that I started recording this, please feel free to post again. I try to get to every single one. I rarely skip one, and if I do, it's usually a mistake. So, but anyway, thanks for everybody that participates. I really enjoy doing these, and thanks again for being an awesome supporter. I'll talk to you guys next time.